Welcome, everyone. My name is Marina Antunes, Festival Director for Spark Animation, and I want to welcome you to this entry into our Meet the Filmmaker series for this year's festival. Very excited to have with us the director of Slouch, Michael Bohnenstingl. And Slouch was actually the winner of the runner-up prize student film at Spark Animation this year. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
Hey, nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about you before we talk about the film specifically, because it seems to me like you were already working in the industry before you actually went to school for animation. Did I read that right?
Yeah, it's a bit. I have like a incredibly lucky way into the animation industry. I'm trying to keep a long story short. So essentially, it started with me having a very short internship, like just 1 week, which you had to do during your during school. And I chose, or I sort of got lucky that I got this tiny internship at Studio Soy, which is a great animation studio in around the town where I was living. And they noticed that I was interested in animation, so they kept bringing me back in all kinds of internships. So I actually got to work in the industry as a compositing artist, and then also a bit of directing, even before my studies. And then I started studying, and they said, "Hey, we have a directing job, being part of a directing team. Do you want to do that?" So I said, "Of course." And luckily, the school let me take a 2 year break. So yeah, I sort of like my school was sort of actual school, like film school, but also the industry a little bit. So I was very lucky on that. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, so you're already working, you're going to school, you have to make some films for class, but you've also already made some films outside of school. That certainly gives you a little bit of an advantage.
I guess, yeah, but it's also, it's also tricky because, of course, in the industry you learn, which I appreciate, but you also learn to, communicate with an audience a lot. And of course, in your studies, you have the opportunity to go crazy. So I think that my brain shifted a little bit between these things, like especially coming back to school, and was already in the mindset of, okay, let's really, let's get the message straight, let's communicate with an audience. And sometimes in studies, you actually want to be more open. So that was actually a bit of a, shifting of the mind a little bit, but I think I managed.
Well, I wonder if this has anything to do, because one of the things I noticed from your website is your films all have a very different look. Like none of them look like the other. Was that sort of part of that exploration process for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it more has to do with the fact that I don't necessarily see myself as like an animation filmmaker, just a filmmaker in general and a storyteller. So, whatever you throw at me, I will try to make the best of it. And the look of it all sort of comes, for me, it comes after figuring out the story and the characters and getting that emotionally resonant, and then finding a way of how things look. It develops. So it's sort of my second priority after having a great story to tell.
So let's talk about story and the story of Slouch, because one of the things that, was really noted by the jury after the screenings was how this film feels so well developed. It tells a full story in a very short period of time that has like this really universal message of, keeping your dream alive kind of thing. So can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for the film and where the story for Slouch came from?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the jury saw that. So, well, when I was studying, I was also making a lot of music. I consider myself a bit of a musician as well, and I really love, like the independent, underground, grungy kind of music scene, and the DIY music scene. And it seems to me that this kind of music, like the Kurt Cobain kind of characters, it always has to do with a lot of pain. And I noticed that my musician friends, the really good ones, they also carried that sort of idea of pain and creativity and the relationship between the two things. They carried that with them, and they were really precious about it. They didn't want to lose their pain because they were afraid that if they would lose their pain, they would lose their creativity. And that was to me such a crazy and interesting paradox, and I felt it in myself as well. Like you're afraid to lose that beautiful machine inside of you. And yeah, and I delved into that topic and tried to find a narrative and did a lot of research. And I did find, what also the film is about, that once you dare to, become a better you, whatever that means in your context, you actually don't lose the creative machine. The creative machine is just there. It's just part of who you are, and it comes back in a different form, but you will not lose it. And I hope that's true for for everyone. Yeah.
You call it the creative machine, I call it inspiration, but you have this great way of visualizing that as like a character. Can you talk a little bit about developing the visual look of the film, and specifically this concept of this thing that's always on your shoulder? Like, I think at some point his girlfriend says like right at the beginning, is it you or is it your clone? And it's almost like that's like your the little clone that's always with you. Can you talk about
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, so so the character of, he's called Nufti, the little potato-shaped guy on the back of Slouch. He sort of came, during development, because I knew what the character was struggling with, but I didn't really know yet how to, visualize it. And at some point, the coin just dropped and was like, well, this voice inside of you should be its own character. And then suddenly became a friendship story between these two, and that sort of felt very emotional. It didn't feel as abstract anymore as it did before, and it felt emotionally quite resonant. And yeah, and then the character design, it actually came from, I was exploring, and I'm not the best designer, and I asked my friend Simone Pivetta, a crazy cool Italian guy, one of my best friends, and he just scribbled a design of the Slouch character, who has this sort of S-shaped neck, and then suddenly it felt like, well, you just need to put him right there. It fit perfectly, and also made some metaphorical sense, actually, that it's a bit of a weight on your shoulders as well. And then yeah, it sort of naturally developed into that.
I think you kind of already alluded to this a little bit, but I think it's really interesting that even though the story is about a musician, it really is a universal tale. Can you talk a little bit more about why you decided to pursue this as a musician dealing with his, a creative machine, and not like an animator or a filmmaker?
Yeah, well, I felt that relationship. I mean, there's sort of two answers to this. One of them is that the more intellectual one is that I feel like this relationship between pain and creativity is especially true for musicians, because it's such an immediate form of expressing yourself. Making a film takes ages and years and so much work, and you have so much time to overthink it. Whereas, you could essentially write the perfect song for the perfect moment, just sitting there with guitar or a piano, whatever. So it's a very immediate art form. It's also true for comedians, I think, because they deal a lot with, their character and who they are, and they just open themselves up completely. So I felt it's true for that art form. But also, it was my graduation film, and I wanted to put all my passions into it. And one of them was music, and I'm a big lover of music films, and I wanted to make a music film. So yeah, and that's a not so intellectual answer to your question.
Well, no, this is a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you about the music, because the music is so wonderful. And I was looking at the end credits, and that's where I kind of tinged that clearly you're into the music scene and you're also a musician, because you do have credit for some of the songs. But can you talk a little bit about how the musical soundscape for the film developed, and whether you approached people to write songs specifically for the film, or if it was more of you heard a song that you thought would fit into the film? How did that dynamic come together?
Yeah, so again, it sort of came from, the narrative came first, and I knew that I needed sort of develop this musician as an artist from, not very good, quite self-serving and self-centered songs, to a big hit in the middle, and then at the end it sort of becomes this new thing where suddenly the music isn't about himself anymore, but for and about another person. And that's sort of where okay, these are the marks I need to hit. And then during development, I just sort of, collected a lot of fragments, and, I had my guitar always with me, and just, you know, dibbling around and trying things out. And so, yeah, this could be something. This could be something. I repurposed old songs I already had written. And yeah, and then for the first song, for example, the opening song, which is a bit of a basic punk song, it was literally written in 10 minutes with a friend, which is like, okay, let's make a terrible, terrible punk song. And it was bam, and there it was. And this is exactly how it needed to feel. And then where's the last song, the ballad, the lullaby at the end? Actually, that one was took it longest, and I asked another musician who wrote a beautiful piece for it. But it's such a precious, important moment of the film, and at one point, of course, I chose my own song at the end because how it is. But yeah, and it took a long time to find just the right delicate feeling as well. And so a little fun fact about the last song is that this is actually what you're hearing is actually the demo version, because ever so often the demo version is the real version, and I try to retake it, and I try to rearrange it and re-record it to get better quality, but never was as good as this one moment of me sitting with the guitar next to on my bedside, with the recorder running. So this is the actual moment that was the truest of the song. So yeah, it was a lot of stitching things together and making it work.
That's amazing. And this is really interesting because, when we talk to filmmakers, a lot of the time when we talk about challenges, those challenges can focus specifically on like, the animation or something to do with the technicality. But in your case, where you've done so much more than just the direction and the writing, but also the music, which played such a big role, what was the biggest challenge of making Slouch?
Oh my God, it was just figuring out what I want to do with life and everything. It seems to me that when you make a graduation film, me and many of my peers, you always try to make this sort of this statement that needs to define everything of who you are and who you're gonna be and all your personal trauma, and just working through that and reining it in and developing a version, throwing it away. And many times I sort of broken and reassembled this movie, and there were many times I was like, I can't do this anymore, this is terrible, and I want to throw it all away. And yeah, so just just figuring out, okay, this is what I want to do, and being confident in the story. And because it's the last free movie you get to make in a way, and that just overcoming that weight of that moment, and finding levity in making a film again, and lightness. Yeah, that was the hardest part. But once I had that, then I stumbled into the Corona year, um, which for me, very personal view, was good, for making the movie, because all I could do was make the movie. So I had this year where I just sat down and animated, and nothing disturbed me. So that was actually good. The production part was actually the easy part in that sense. It just had to be done. But finding it and redeveloping it and finding the structure, that was the hard part. And so I'm especially happy that the jury, saw that this is where the work went.
That's amazing. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Night of Shame.
Oh
If
yeah.
this sounds genius, I need to know more. Where did this concept come from?
So the Night of Shame is the alternative film competition in which we invite directors to show their most terrible and most shameful film. And we have a couple of, like we have 8 to 10 people in a night, and I interview them on stage. It's very funny usually, and at the end, the audience gets to vote on which one was the most embarrassing film. So that's the Night of Shame, and it was first developed in 2015, actually, at Studio Soy, this animation studio, where it was just an internal event where Klaus Morschhäuser and me sort of staged the first version of that. And then I carried that over into Animation Institute, where I studied as again, an internal event. At some point, we were like, well, could this be a show, public show? And we changed it a little bit. And then during the ITFS, the International Festival of Animation in Stuttgart, we did our first version back in 2019, and it worked beautifully. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. It's just like, well, let's see if this works. And it worked really well. And so far we had like 3 editions, and we're going to do another one next year. And yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. And it's really, sometimes when we pitch it to people, they go like, well, isn't that a bit, shaming people? And we're like, no, it's a very warm thing. It's really about showing yourself from your not perfect side, which sometimes doesn't happen at festivals. As sometimes at festivals, everybody's really about how great they are and how great everything else is. And we just completely flip that on its head and embrace our terribleness. And yeah, it's quite beautiful.
I love the concept. I think it's kind of genius. And this fact that you're sort of celebrating the fact that we're not all perfect is kind of amazing. Kind of
Yeah,
amazing.
it really it makes you feel elated, I hope.
Oh, for sure. So, I'm really curious about where you're off to next and what you're working on next. Clearly, you have a very bright career ahead of you. Are you working on anything new, either music related or film related?
So yeah, my last 3 years since I graduated were a lot of writing actually. Like I never aimed at being a writer, but it sort of, naturally developed that I got a lot of writing jobs for feature length things, also a bit of live action, also short films. So I was a lot of, yeah, doing a lot of writing and developing new ideas. And yeah, things are coming, and yeah, that's I think that's all I can say because none of them are my personal projects, but I'm working.
Awesome. Good for you. And congratulations. And I hope that we'll get to see another personal project in the coming years. It's been really, really wonderful to speak with you. Congratulations again on Slouch. It's a really wonderful film. And best of
Thanks
luck
so
in
much.
everything.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you so much. Have fun at Spark Animation.